Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're diving into a chapter that is, no joke, super important and also really fascinating: microbes and human welfare. We're going to break down all the high-yield concepts and those must-know examples that are practically guaranteed to pop up on your CBSE and NEET exams. So get ready and let's get started. Yep, that's right. We're talking about microbes. And I know your first thought might be germs and getting sick, but the truth is the huge majority of these little guys are actually on our team. They're like this invisible workforce that helps us make delicious food, create life-saving medicine, and even clean up our planet. It's time to meet these unsung heroes. So here's our game plan for today. We'll start right in the heart of our homes, the kitchen, and then we'll zoom out to see how microbes are total powerhouses in massive industries. We'll look at their life-saving work in medicine, their role as nature's ultimate cleanup crew, and what they do for agriculture. And of course, we'll wrap up with a laser-focused exam section to make sure you're totally ready to crush your tests. Let's kick off our microbial adventure in a place we all know and love, the kitchen. You'd actually be surprised at just how many of your favorite foods literally wouldn't exist without these tiny helpers. Okay, let's start with a classic, turning milk into curd. So who's behind this little bit of kitchen magic? It's a group called lactic acid bacteria, or LAB for short, and the main player is lactobacillus. When you add a bit of starter curd, that's the inoculum, into warm milk, you're basically introducing millions of these bacteria. They get straight to work, multiplying like crazy and producing lactic acid. This acid is what makes the milk proteins clump together or coagulate and form curd. Oh, and here's a cool bonus. This whole process also boosts the vitamin B12 content. All right, pay close attention to this table because it's an absolute gold mine for your exams. Let's run through it. You know that puffy, airy texture of dosa and idli dough? That's all thanks to the carbon dioxide gas released during bacterial fermentation. Same thing with bread. It rises because of the CO2 produced by the yeast Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which you might know as baker's yeast. Now, cheese is interesting. Those big, iconic holes in Swiss cheese, they're literally bubbles of CO2 produced by a bacterium called Propionibacterium shermanii. And that distinct, strong flavor of Roquefort cheese, that comes from being ripened with a specific type of fungus. Even traditional drinks like toddy from palm sap are a result of microbial fermentation. Okay, let's go from the kitchen to the factory. The exact same ideas of fermentation are used on a massive industrial scale to create beverages, antibiotics, and all sorts of other valuable chemicals. This is where microbes really flex their muscles as industrial powerhouses. So our old friend Saccharomyces cerevisiae is back, but this time it's called brewer's yeast. It ferments things like malted cereals and fruit juices to produce ethanol, the alcohol in our drinks. Now, this slide points out a really critical difference you need to know. Beverages like wine and beer are produced without distillation. That's why they have a relatively lower alcohol content. But, on the other hand, drinks like whiskey, brandy, and rum are made by distilling that fermented broth. The distillation process concentrates the alcohol, giving them a much, much higher alcohol content. Remember that key difference. Just think of microbes as tiny chemical factories. This table here is their product catalog, and you absolutely have to memorize these pairs for your exams. Let's do a quick run-through. Citric acid, that comes from the fungus Aspergillus niger. Acetic acid is from the bacterium Acetobacter aceti. Butyric acid, Clostridium butylicum. And lactic acid, we already know, is from lactobacillus. Now for the enzymes. Lipases are a secret weapon in detergents. They're great at breaking down oily stains. And here's a fun one. Ever wonder why store-bought juices are so clear and not pulpy? It's because they're treated with pectinases and proteases to break everything down. Now we're moving on to what is arguably one of the most incredible contributions microbes have made to human welfare: medicine. This is where microbes go from being just helpful to being actual, genuine lifesavers. This quote, straight from your NCERT textbook, really says it all. Antibiotics, these are chemicals that some microbes produce to kill other microbes, are the absolute foundation of modern medicine. The discovery of penicillin, the very first one, completely changed the world. It meant that infections that were once a death sentence could suddenly be treated. It's really not an exaggeration to say we can't even imagine our world today without these microbial gifts. Okay, get ready to take some mental notes because this slide is a huge favorite for exam questions. Let's take it one by one. First up, streptokinase, which comes from the bacterium Streptococcus. This enzyme is known as a clot buster. It's used to dissolve blood clots in patients who've just had a heart attack. Next, we have cyclosporin A from the fungus Trichoderma polysporum. This is a really powerful immunosuppressant. What that means is it prevents a patient's own immune system from attacking and rejecting a newly transplanted organ. Super important. And finally, we have statins from the yeast Meniscus purpurus. These are prescribed to lower blood cholesterol levels, which helps reduce the risk of heart disease. See the pattern? For major medical problems, there are microbes with specific solutions. All right, let's shift our focus now from our own bodies to the health of our planet. Microbes are basically the original recyclers, and we've figured out how to use their skills for huge environmental cleanup jobs, especially when it comes to treating sewage. So every single day, our cities produce millions and millions of gallons of wastewater, or sewage. Cleaning this stuff up is a massive job, and it happens in two main stages. The first is primary treatment. This is basically just a physical process. Think of it like a big strainer. It uses filters and gravity to remove the big stuff, floating garbage, sand, and grit. The liquid that's left over is called the primary effluent, and that moves on to the real star of the show, secondary treatment. This is where our microbial buddies get to work. But before we go on, we have to understand this term BOD, which stands for biochemical oxygen demand. To put it simply, BOD is just a way to measure how much organic pollution is in the water. The more waste there is, the more oxygen the good guy microbes need to break it all down. So a high BOD means the water is really, really polluted. The entire goal of secondary treatment is to get that BOD number way, way down. And this is where the magic happens. What you're seeing here is a huge aeration tank. The primary effluent gets pumped in, and air is constantly bubbled through it. This creates the perfect environment for a massive growth of helpful aerobic bacteria and fungi. They form these mesh-like structures called flocks, and these flocks are our cleanup crew. They just start eating up all the organic waste in the water, which dramatically reduces the BOD and makes the water much cleaner. So get this. Microbes can actually help us create clean energy. This whole process of making biogas depends on a group of anaerobic bacteria called methanogens. These bacteria are naturally found in the gut of cattle, which is why cow dung, or gobar, is such a key ingredient. So in a biogas plant, you mix the dung with water and put it in a big tank called a digester. Inside, the methanogens start breaking down all the organic matter and produce a mix of gases, mainly methane. This biogas is then used as fuel for cooking and lighting. And you know what the best part is? The leftover slurry is an amazing, nutrient-rich fertilizer for crops. It's a perfect, sustainable cycle. Let's head out to the fields for our last big application area, agriculture. At a time when everyone's trying to use fewer chemical fertilizers and pesticides, microbes offer a fantastic, natural, and sustainable alternative. For a long time, the main strategy to protect crops was to just spray everything with chemical pesticides. But we now know these chemicals can harm good insects, pollute the environment, and even affect our health. This is where biocontrol comes in. It's just a smarter, more natural way to manage pests. We use other living organisms to keep the bad guys in check. You've probably seen this yourself, like ladybugs eating aphids or dragonflies hunting mosquitoes. But microbes can be biocontrol agents too. A great example is the bacterium Bacillus thuringiensis, or BT. You can spray its spores on plants, and when a caterpillar munches on the leaf, the spores release a toxin that kills the caterpillar, but it's totally harmless to other insects. It's like a precision-guided missile for pests. Similarly, the fungus trichoderma is great at fighting off harmful pathogens in the soil. Just like us, plants need nutrients to grow, and one of the most important nutrients is nitrogen. Now, the air all around us is nearly 80% nitrogen, but plants can't use it directly from the air. It needs to be fixed or converted into a usable form like ammonia. That's where biofertilizers come in. These are basically microbes that act like little nitrogen factories for plants. The most famous example is rhizobium, a bacterium that lives in the root nodules of legume plants, like peas. It grabs nitrogen from the air and hands it over to the plant in a form it can use. Other microbes, like blue-green algae, do a similar job, naturally enriching the soil so our crops can thrive without needing so many chemical fertilizers. Okay, we've covered a ton of information. Now, let's put on our exam caps and really sharpen our focus. This section is all about hammering home the most important ideas and practicing with some classic NCERT questions. All right, here's a very, very common question you're likely to see on an exam. Think back for a second. When we were talking about sewage treatment, what was that fundamental difference between those two main stages? And here is your perfect, marks-guaranteed answer. It all comes down to one key distinction: physical versus biological. Primary treatment is a physical process. It's basically just sifting and straining to get the solid stuff out. Secondary treatment is a biological process. It relies on living microbes to eat up the dissolved organic waste. If you can remember those two words, physical and biological, you've got the perfect answer. Let's do one more. This one is a direct recall question, straight out of that bioactive molecule section. It's pure memory. But these are the kinds of questions that get you top marks in competitive exams. Can you remember the sources for these two amazing molecules?
And there they are. Cyclosporin A comes from the fungus Trichoderma polysporum, and statins come from the yeast Monascus purpuris. Seeing it one last time in a simple table like this should really help lock it into your brain for exam day.
So as we wrap things up, the big takeaway here is really clear. From the curd on our plate, to the life-saving medicines in our hospitals, and even the clean water coming from our taps, microbes are these silent, essential partners in almost every single part of our lives. And that really gets you thinking about the future, right? So far, we've mostly learned how to work with the natural abilities of these microbes. But what happens when we start using genetic engineering to enhance their skills? Imagine designing microbes that can produce brand new medicines, or eat plastic waste, or create clean biofuels. The possibilities are truly endless. Their potential might be microscopic, but the impact is absolutely massive. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.